This election now.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Taco Comfort Solutions.
So media mogul Harvey Weinstein got jammed up today in New York on 2 of 5 counts, and it just came in before we started taping our show in the early afternoon. We'll follow up on that in the next couple of weeks to talk about the impact of that conviction. The charges and the story surrounding him clearly changed America, but did it until convictions happened, right? So obviously there's a sexual harassment orientation that's at a new and proper level. These convictions add more juice to that, and we'll talk about the ramifications over time. I wanted to mention that. Nice to have you, and thanks for tuning in on a Monday evening. One local story is all that's grabbing me right now before I get to my very compelling guest. Barbara Ann Fenton Fung is taking out papers to run against Nick Mattiello in District 15. The House Speaker is under so much heat right now. He's got a political ally paid employee who is under indictment and looking at a spring-summer trial, and it will be a tell-all on the Mattiello campaign. The speaker the speaker thinks there's some comfort in not being called to the grand jury on this case of his potential influence over the Convention Center Authority with an audit that was ordered and rescinded amidst all of the complications of that. 9 people have been to the grand jury there, and because he hasn't been there, he thinks that's okay. He's a lawyer. He knows that's not true. He hasn't been there. That means he's the target. And so if that comes to some kind of indictment, it'll be interesting. Regardless, just the clouds that have been kicked up and the dust that surrounds his reelection effort is problematic. Whether Ms. Fenton Fung is going to really jump into this race or not, I think is still left to be determined. Taking out papers and filing those papers are 2 very different things. Steve Frias looms out there as the District 15 candidate who was the most competitive with Nick Mattiello in the last 2 go-rounds. No word from him. Stay tuned. In the meantime, Bernie Sanders dominates the Nevada caucus. The headline here, sure, it is victory. It is broad, and it is big, and it is very worrisome to establishment Democrats. Here's what the network had.
My God, there are a lot of people here tonight.
Senator Bernie Sanders campaigned Sunday in the Super Tuesday state of Texas, speaking to crowds of thousands.
Now, I've been hearing, the establishment is getting a little bit nervous about our campaign.
Sanders now has the most delegates and votes, not to mention all the momentum, something former Vice President Joe Biden is hoping to curb this week in South Carolina.
The African-American community in South Carolina can make a judgment about who the next president of the United States is going to be.
Doing well in South Carolina means winning over the state's predominantly black voters, and Biden's support has been slipping.
What I'm expecting is to make the case to the people here in South Carolina that they have an opportunity to essentially determine who the next president is.
The biggest hurdle for moderate Democrats right now is consolidating enough support to stop Sanders. Some Democrats, like South Carolina Congressman Jim Clyburn, are concerned that the senator, a self-described Democratic socialist, will alienate some voters.
This is South Carolina, and South Carolinians are pretty leery about that title, socialist.
CBS News has learned that Clyburn is expected to endorse Biden on Wednesday, and Congresswoman Donna Shalala, a Democrat representing parts of South Florida, is raising concerns about Sanders' comments about the late Cuban dictator Fidel Castro on 60 Minutes.
We're very opposed to the authoritarian nature of Cuba. But, it's unfair to simply say everything is bad. When Fidel Castro came into office, you know what he did? He had a massive literacy program. Is that a bad thing? Even though Fidel Castro did it?
There's a lot of dissidents imprisoned in Cuba.
That's right, and we condemn that.
Boy, I'll tell you, editing is going to be a big part of this campaign. How you edit what a candidate says has got a lot to do with, I saw that entire interview. They did a pretty good job there of fleshing out. Michael Kennedy is one of my go-to guys here on the sociology of everything that's going on. Since you've last been here, we had an acquittal. We had Blagojevich, commuted. We've The president hardly learned his lesson the day after he was acquitted. We'll talk about that. But let's get to the election stuff. Welcome, by the way, my friend. It's good to see you. Michael just gave me this. So let me give you a shot here. Where do you find this? This is a comic book. You wrote this?
It's a comic. No, I didn't write it.
You have a hand in it.
Chuck Brown is the writer, and Prenzi and Call are the artists associated with it.
It's called On the Stump?
On the Stump.
And what's it all about?
So I contributed to it because this is a complete innovation. They are writing an exciting dystopian comic about the world in which we're living, except that the world has given up on elections and they just want to have fights, like ultimate fighting, and worse, to decide which bills get passed.
Meaning, well...
So, and what they invited me to do and a bunch of four
elections haven't always been fights?
Not in the ring, not where people are bloodied literally and killed. So this comic is helping, I would say, helping America recognize that we're headed down a very dangerous path. And I have to say that all of these visits to your show helped me figure out a way to write for more people than ever what fighting over America is. And so if people want to see what I have to say, On the Stump.
Well, give me a little bit of it. So does it relate to that which is going on right now in the primary? All right,
Absolutely.
So tell me, what's your take on this? You know, most people who have been familiar with your many wonderful visits here would think that you'd be happy with Bernie Sanders.
Yes.
You are happy with Bernie Sanders.
I am happy with what Bernie Sanders represents. And you know what that is?
What's that?
It's many people...
Other than people like me being nervous that he wins the primary, we have Donald Trump for the next 4 years.
So I am happy to talk about all those worries with you. And I think we need to be cognizant of it. But what Bernie Sanders first and foremost represents is that it's not just people mobilizing against what Trump represents. It's mobilizing against the system that produced Trump. And what is that system that produced Trump above all? A society of growing inequalities where more and more people can't have their needs met through the system. And Bernie Sanders is mobilizing people for that hope, for that ambition, for a more just America.
I'm a student of branding. He made a bad decision here. He's over time acquiesced to letting the socialist label get pinned on him. The definition of democratic socialist, totally different. One has to read it to understand it. One has to understand it to be able to factor it in. He does, look, he's a liberal politician in the sense that he promotes programs that make me say, where's the money, Bernie? Like the old-fashioned 10, 20 years, 30 years ago questions I would be asking any left-of-center politician, where there'd be conflict between that person and me because I'd like to see a little bit more modest expenditure mindset, right? Or very more modest.
Yes.
However, I get what you're saying already, and the more I listen to commentary within the liberal community, there's an articulation of the haves and have-nots that it no longer is just cranking, it is true. You know, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, old line. It is absolutely true now. Mercenary capitalism is true. Those things are true. You don't have to be a left-wing wacko to understand those things if you pay a little bit of attention to the trend. I don't think people are going to be able to get there from here with him, with this notion of democratic socialist, because the term is scary. It is an old term. It connotes Russia, not communism. It's just systems that don't jive with what we perceive in our very limited civics understanding to be the way we run here. So I don't know how he gets through. So jump to that. Because we don't have time for all the deep stuff. Jump to that.
So, all right, so...
Sorry for the long-winded thing, but you know what I'm saying.
I know entirely what you're saying, and in fact, that's why, when I began my graduate studies career in sociology, that's why I went to study communist-ruled societies. Because I knew there was a profound difference between what communist rule represented and what social democracy and democratic socialism.
Explain it in a sentence or a paragraph.
The sentence is this. Democratic socialism is about deepening democracy, so that everyone can participate and has rights to influence the future. It's not a society for billionaires. Communist rule is about the party knowing better what society needs. So Bernie Sanders is about deepening democracy, and Fidel Castro was about knowing better. And that means that Fidel Castro sometimes did know better. He did believe in literacy. That was good. And Bernie Sanders has to walk that line, especially in South Florida.
Deepening democracy means what?
It means extending people's capacities to vote, extending the market for how we decide, not based on how much money you have.
What restrictions do people have to vote, other than some of the process stuff and look? Voter ID. You would suggest is
voter suppression.
That's
is one
voter
of them.
suppression. Voter ID is voter suppression.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to go down that pipe with you. I disagree. But tell me. Tell me the deepening democracy. Explain to the person who's worried what deepening democracy
So here's a
benefits. What does that mean?
Here's a really good
If it's just
example.
access to the ballot box, I have no patience, Michael, for people who complain about not being able to vote.
So no, it goes deeper than that. So here's the thing. What should we be debating in America? We should be debating health care for all or not. What's the right plan to assure health care for all? Not, hiding it away and saying, a rising tide lifts all ships. It doesn't. This growing inequality that we have is making our society more unjust. So if we were to debate what would enable greater justice, that's deepening democracy. Not saying, let's not part of the story.
We're going to take a break. We'll come back. The problem, I think, also with Bernie is he's talking about concepts with no price tags. That's not electable. Stay with us.
We won the New Hampshire primary. We won the Nevada caucus. And don't tell anybody, because these folks get very, very agitated and nervous. We're going to win here in Texas, and in November, we're going to defeat Trump here in Texas.
He gets out to a significant lead here. They may not be able to chase him. Super Tuesday, just a week away, is going to be really fascinating. Look, he's not putting price tags on his plans. His plans are still conceptual. I mean, big picture numbers sometimes, tax on rich to pay for these programs. There's a practical level to running for office. You've got to be able, for that 8% that are going to be out there that are out for the grab right now, and I don't think it's any bigger than that, 5-8%, they want to know that you're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And they're susceptible to the idea that you're going to tax us, into poverty. Quick answer. Then we'll move on to some other quick things.
I don't think that he's going to tax us into poverty, but I do think that that's the narrative that the moderate Democrats are throwing against him. So my hope is this. My hope is that somehow Bernie and Elizabeth Warren are able to bring together the progressive wing and assure that we're not going to have a brokered convention in which moderate Democrats try to stop Bernie and then break the party apart and give it back to Trump. That is the nightmare that's going to result from these primaries.
Well, the irresistible force and immovable object here that the moderate Democrats, establishment Democrats, feel very strongly that he very much is he's the party breaker. What's interesting is whether when does Buttigieg and Klobuchar get off the train, and obviously they're very, very insulted over the idea that a multi-billionaire has entered the fracas and is complicating the whole situation. So. Do you see if Bernie doesn't pull this off, and it is likely now in the 70-80 percentile that he will.
Yeah.
But if he doesn't pull this thing off, can you see a Sanders following supporting a Bloomberg?
No. Bloomberg cannot be the Democratic Party nominee. I'll support almost anyone else in the party, but not Bloomberg. He is not the candidate of the Democratic Party.
Because?
Because he is buying the election. We're about deepening democracy. We're not about buying democracy. He is representing the same. Here I'm with Elizabeth Warren in that debate. She was exactly right. We don't want to trade one corrupt billionaire for another corrupt billionaire, even if he has given away more money than Trump. You don't buy loyalty.
There have been a lot of words have been tested in the last decade for their true meaning.
Yeah.
friend on Facebook, for instance, like, corruption and its definition are going to get a good test. You know, I guess there are levels of it, because it might be the one thing I'm struggling with most in the last 30 days, and that is the immensity of the money. The idea that he beats his chest over not, getting anybody's money. I think my political contribution to you as a candidate is an expression of my First Amendment connection to you. It's not bad. It's not dirty. Writing money to candidates is not a bad thing intrinsically. He's made it that way. And so it's really, is that corrupt in and of itself? Do you got 10 hours? When we come back, some of the stuff that's been happening, though, and Michael's deeper thoughts. Stay with us.
How do you properly thank someone who's given you back the freedom that was stolen from you? He didn't have to do this. He's a Republican president. I was a Democratic governor. And doing this does nothing to help his politics. President Trump is a man who is tough and outspoken, but he also has a kind heart.
In the old days, that would have been game, set, match. How many in the old days have you and I talked about since we've been visiting? Dozens now. Dozens, literally dozens. Quick take on that, then we'll go backwards to Barr and some of the other stuff that's happening in the Trump administration right now.
So this is another clear instance of corruption. We have so many flavors of corruption, we need a new ice cream store, right? And this example is perfect. You don't have to corrupt, you don't have to have money change hands for corruption. He just gave Trump a great endorsement in exchange for being let out of prison early. But I don't know that I would want Blagojevich's endorsement. But Trump apparently does.
Well, that's the currency he travels in. He would be offended if he didn't get it.
Oh, yeah.
And the reason I think he did it is because, hey, someone told, hey, by the way, Jim Comey helped to put Blagojevich away. And that was really all it was about for me. I mean, it was as simple as that. Try to deep think this guy. It's really an exercise in futility. Go back to the headlines, Eric, if we can, on Barr. So we get a day after the acquitted. Did we put a picture up of Trump acquitted? Do we have that? I mean, let me switch. There you go. That speech in the East Room was unbelievable. This is incredible.
The prayer breakfast was horrendous.
The prayer breakfast was unbelievable. Just on and on and on and on. But you know what? The Democratic case was not well prepared. I thought they should have been more patient. They weren't. They were on a race for the election. People got that. There was a smell of they're corrupt too. I mean, this notion of corruption is probably everyone sees it, uses it, and claims it now.
Right.
On either side. No, you're corrupt. No, you're corrupt. No, you're more. And relativism of right and wrong has never been more present. That was bad. Yeah. But you know what? That was bad. No. But Obama was. Obama what? What? Like, is this purple and pink and yellow? Yes or no? Oh, I don't know. There's something else that might be pink and purple or yellow. It's. So crazy. So give me your thoughts real quick on all of that's happened with after the election, Barr, Stone, Blagojevich through.
So I think one contradiction is worth thinking about: the rule of law and the rule over law.
Meaning?
Trump is claiming to rule over law. He is telling Barr without telling Barr what to do. Barr is trying to push back in order to preserve some veneer of the rule of law. After all of these attorney generals have written in protest, in solidarity, saying, step down, Barr, because you're violating your oath as attorney general. So right now, my greatest mystery is, why does Trump even pretend that this is a society governed by law? He just wants to govern it himself. And this is the danger. We are losing our sense of self because it is turning into a no-holds-barred fight.
I'm not sure he's pretending that he just does what he wants to do. I think it's clear. What do you need him to say? I don't believe in law. I just believe in Trump law.
Then
I'm not so sure the base would be offended by that. I mean,
then an impeachment trial would not be the sham that it was. Because at least in that impeachment trial, we were trying to hold on to the sense that we were actually watching the Senate judge. Mitt Romney was the only Republican to stand up and say, you know what, Trump was bad enough here that he should be convicted on this one instance. And what did they do to him? They're going to punish and isolate him as much as possible. So this is not, the Senate is not the, this venerable body of debate and discussion. It is in Trump's pocket. And this is the tragedy, that we are losing our great institutions to a man who's fighting with no Queensberry rules. Boxing, 1860s.
Got that. I'm just sitting here thinking about how people are watching you say that. And there are a lot of folks watching these things saying, you know what? Market's good, economy's good, don't like him either. Stop crying. Shut up, stop crying.
I'm not crying about him. I'm fighting.
Stop whining about him.
This is not whining. This is trying to tell us what's going on. And the market is down. It's the coronavirus.
Coronavirus today, yeah.
Right? We'll see.
I didn't even mention it at the top because, either this thing is going to calm itself over the next few weeks or we're going to have a real thing on our hands. I don't know which one. We've seen this before, and a market dip of 1,000 against 28,000, 29,000 is hardly something to
But this is the
about.
point, that we are facing so many dangers. This coronavirus could be horrific, right? Certainly we have the environmental catastrophe we're facing. We are facing Russia interference in our elections. We are facing rising violence by domestic terrorists, right? So we are facing many crises, and we can't doubt the integrity and competence of our government. And I'm afraid that we are headed toward that hell in a handbasket too. McRaven is worth listening to.
I think there's no doubt. Our institutional respect and trust is at an all-time low.
Yes.
I don't even know how it's recoverable. I think it is. I don't think Bernie Sanders is the answer. By the way, I don't think he's going to be making any speeches about how we have to trust an institutional government anymore. That which protects us and builds the roads and the bridges. I'm not sure. I don't know, Michael. This is going to be one heck of a next couple of months. Give me a 30-second summary on life as it is right now.
We don't know our future.
How many times have you said that?
And more significantly, we can't rest with what the pundits are saying. I'll trust you as a pundit, but nobody else, right?
Oh God, I don't need that. I don't need that elevation.
And that's because everybody's so invested in what they've done in the past. We need to be a little bit more humble about what we need for the future. And I think that's why Sanders is betting on our courage.
He's betting on your students getting out at 90%. Are they going out? Are they going to
Yes.
vote? Are they that active?
Yes.
Because if they don't, he's sunk. All right. Hey, pick up the On the Stump, where comic books are sold. Final word when we come back. So tomorrow night, Attorney General Peter Nerona will be our guest. There are a lot of interesting cases that we've had, including the 38 Studios clampdown by the Supreme Court on the grand jury testimony, something he defended, not because he wanted to, but because he didn't think the law was sufficient for the governor's claim that all the files ought to be released to we the people. You remember 38 Studios? The details are waning, but the impact we live with in Rhode Island every day. We'll talk to you on the radio at 3 until 6 as well on WPRO. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.